But Joe, thanks for making some time this morning. You are the man when it comes to everything Saudi Arabia to begin with. I mean, from a knowledge perspective, and we certainly had a lively discussion this morning on our morning research call. I think that my main takeaway from that was I don't know. And that's usually the most important thing for me to acknowledge, is that I don't know what comes next. But I certainly want you to frame up both the supply picture, which a lot of people have opinions on, and then the geopolitical set of, of possibilities that are out there post this certainly surprising attack happening.
Yeah, Keith, great to be with you today and the Macro Show audience. Just before I go into that, just two pieces of news since our morning call, and you've been talking here on the Macro Show. The U.S. is now putting out information that the attacks did not come from Iraq, as we've thought from over the weekend, but actually originated in Iran. And I'm told they'll be presenting evidence to that effect. We're starting to see some news reports reflect that as well. Also, I think the other big part of this is initially the Saudis were putting out very optimistic statements about how quickly they could resume to normal or some type of normal production. It's now looking like the damage was much more extensive than originally thought, and it could take some time, weeks, if not months, for this facility to come back online. Just so folks have some context here, this is not just Saudi Arabia's biggest oil processing facility. This is the world's biggest oil processing facility. Any oil that gets exported from Saudi Arabia has to go through this oil processing facility to take out various elements and impurities in the oil that can't get refined. So basically, this is a key choke point. It's a site, as we said on our morning call, that was on Al Qaeda's target list over 10 years ago. So there's certainly something that was well known to people who wanted to cause trouble. It's also probably one of the most well secured, guarded sites in the world because of its key nature. But obviously that didn't prevent this attack, and so there's a lot of questions, I think, raised there. So there's a lot that we don't know, and I think that's what's going to keep market volatility here pretty strong. We don't know the extent of the damage. Hopefully the Saudis will be very transparent about this, but even if they are, it's looking like it's going to be bad news, not good news. And then you have this geopolitical factor, which I think is just so important, something that we've talked about for some time. Really, in our view, the geopolitical risk was really never priced into oil markets. I mean, all these tanker attacks and small drone attacks on pipelines coming from Yemen, and calibrated attacks from Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, the market kind of yawned at all of that. Now this is this attack has really awakened, I think, the market, oil markets in particular, to the geopolitical risk factor. And so I think that's what you're seeing now. As you know, because you see all of our notes, we've been talking about, what does Iran do in terms of responding to Trump's sort of maximum pressure campaign and reimposing sanctions. And what we've described is Iran, instead of sort of capitulating, which is really not, in their nature to do, and probably nobody's nature, at least initially, they've decided to take what we call a maximum chaos policy. And that involves, troublemaking. We saw this initially with the tanker attacks. They believe two things. They believe Trump, doesn't want a military conflict and doesn't want a war. And so if they cause enough trouble, it'll bring him to the table and get him to at least reissue waivers or relieve sanctions. Two, they also think raising oil prices hurts Trump politically, and it's another way to bring him to the table. I think they're really misunderstanding not only Trump here, but also sort of the U.S. national security, geopolitical community. And so I don't really see him responding to the maximum chaos plan, but that's really besides the point. They've really calibrated. This is their approach. Obviously, they've done it in a really big way here. Some might say that they probably have over done it here. And I think as we talked about earlier off camera and in our call this morning with the Hedgeye team, it raises a new element that we haven't really seen yet. And that's, what does Saudi Arabia do now? Up until this point, it's what does the U.S. do with Iran? Maybe Israel somewhat is in there. I mean, how long can Saudi Arabia go with attacks on their key oil infrastructure and not responding militarily, with or without the U.S.? And I think traditionally the Saudis have been very cautious in this regard and have kind of let the U.S. take the lead. But really, we have a new sheriff in town in Saudi Arabia with King Salman and the Crown Prince. And this is, we're talking about unknowns. This is an unknown. But I do think the chances are quite high that there's a military response here. Just from what I picked up over the weekend, talking to friends, Iran's fingerprints are all over this. Not just involvement, but probably the key central role here.
And if the Chinese have any fingerprints on the Iranian fingerprints, this is going to get a lot hotter, a lot faster. This is when I bucket, and thank you for that, because one of your great attributes, not only just in terms of your knowledge base, is just being able to be succinct and boil it down. This is a complex topic, and if I were to boil it down further, supply and geopolitical risk. Those are the two big buckets here. Supply, you're going to have a lot of street opinions, Joe. Lower for longer or slower for longer in terms of resuscitating, like you said, one of the world's most important asset in this regard. But again, that's not where I think the nonlinear risk really pops in. It's into that second bucket where nobody knows. And when you don't know what you don't know, if you just want to jump out there and touch someone and buy stocks, I think you're an idiot. Like, I really do, especially with stocks coming from these levels. This is a really unique moment in time. And I wonder, is there, like, you spend a lot more time than anybody I'm certain listening to, at least mostly, I shouldn't generalize, I'm sure we have some people that may actually live in Saudi Arabia, but you spend more time in the Middle East than anybody that I know, and you're closer to all these people than anybody that I know. On that last bit about the Saudi military reaction, would you guess, an educated guess, would you guess that they will go it alone, or they'd be doing something in coordination with the U.S. and its allies?
Well, I think there will be a U.S. coordination. I think it's degrees of coordination. Right. But I just don't think that this can go unanswered, whether from the U.S. or from the Saudi standpoint. And I do think, as we put in our weekend note, I think it really raises, for the first time, something that the market really never contemplated, and that's a Saudi military response. Yeah. And the chances of that are quite high. Just to talk a little briefly on the supply picture, it's been my view that the oil fundamentals have really been tightening. We've seen drawdowns in global stocks. The Saudis, the OPEC, cuts, I think, have really started to take effect. We're starting to see drawdowns in the U.S. Stocks and also global stocks. And so we were already, I think, heading into the fall with a very tight supply-demand picture. And then you throw on top of that International Maritime Organization low sulfur rules that go into effect early next year. And there was a lot of momentum, I think, behind tighter oil markets, except that and then you had all this geopolitical risk on top of that. But the markets really were focused almost exclusively, I think, on the trade narrative, the China trade war narrative, and of course the macro signs, which you talk about every day. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to take into account other factors as well. And really, I think the market was caught asleep here on this attack.
Yeah, caught up. I mean, again, and if you believe in the Chinese Sun Tzu strategy from a broader perspective, there are fewer and fewer ironies by the day where I see market events, by the way, and that's just something for people to generally noodle over. But I know you're going to be busy today, Joe. We're going to let you go. Clients are buzzing you. And a lot of response to your note. He called it, by the way, Game of Drones. I didn't make that up. I poached it from Joe McMonigle. So again, Game of Drones is on. And again, if it is on, if it's not on, you know what? It's not on. But if it's on, it's on. And nobody knows if it's on or if it's not on, and that is the epicenter of risk. So thanks, Joe, for all your insights. Appreciate it.